Tonight is a shiur on the holiday of Pesach, and what I'd like to do is cover Pesach the way most people never understand it. It's certainly a great deal of the material you probably will never have heard, which is interesting. It's a paradox because Pesach is such a well-known yontif. It's one of the foundations of all the holidays of the entire Jewish faith. Every time we say Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim, of course for the remembrance of the fact that we went out of Egypt. But the truth is, the Pnimiyus of Pesach is not really well known. It's not really understood by most people. Most people think Pesach is basically a historical event, that the Yidden, the Jews, were enslaved, of course, by the Egyptians, and of course the Ribono Shel Olam sent Moshe Rabbeinu to, of course, rescue the Jews, and during the entire time of trying to convince, of course, in quotes, the Egyptians to release the Jews, of course, they had the Esamakas, the 10 plagues, and then they had Kriyas Yamsuf, and finally they received the Torah at Har Sinai. The truth is that Pesach looks like it's based on a historical event. The truth is it's not. The historical event is not what makes Pesach what it is, as we will begin to see during the shiur. The essence of Pesach is really the spiritual conflict that was taking place. And we have to understand what was the spiritual conflict. What did the Jews accomplish in Pesach? Why is it so great? Now, toward that end, I'd like to ask certain questions. And what I wanted to do with this kind of a shiur is to really make it comprehensive. So what we will, of course, we'll be dealing with is why you have certain of the mitzvahs of Pesach. Why are we commanded not to eat from chometz? Why do we have to eat matzah? Why do we have to eat moror? Why do we have 4 cups of wine, the arba koises? Why is it we have a 5th cup, of course, and we say that Eliyahu, and that cup is for Eliyahu? Why do we have 4 expressions of redemption in the Torah? When God says to Moshe Rabbeinu that he will take the Jews out, he employs 5 expressions of geula, of redemption. Of course, the question is why? He should just say, V'galti, and I will redeem them. Why does it say all the other lishonis, all the other expressions? Not only that, we will also begin to understand why was Moshe called Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, many of these questions have answers, but the truth is the Pnimiyus, the answers, when you understand them, will astound you. And it's not the simple ideas, like for instance, Moshe Rabbeinu was called Moshe because Bas Parak drew him from the water. That itself was hashgocha, in the sense that that's why he had to be named Moshe. So the question is why? We just see the event, and which of course illustrates the fact that we're fooled to a great extent by the historical events that seem to cause many of the mitzvahs. And the truth is, of course, is that they don't. The historical events are made to occur in order to bring about those specific laws or halachas. Why was there Kriyas Yamsuf? Of course, because the Jews were running away from Egypt. They were right against the sea. God split the waters and the Jews came out alive, right? And the waters killed the Egyptians. But why? Why is it that a Kriyas Yamsuf has to occur? What's the Pnimiyus of Kriyas Yamsuf? Not only that, we find that Jews have to go through 4 exiles. Bovel, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Why isn't Egypt considered a 5th exile? Do you ever notice? They never consider Egypt a 5th exile. Why not? Not only that, why are there 4 exiles? Why not more? Why not 8 or 9? What is the secret of the fact that there's only 4? Then we get to the rescue of the Jews. Why are there 10 plagues? Why 10? Why these particular 10? How do we understand that? Why is Pesach called Zman Cheresenu? And again, of course, we can say that, well, the reason why it's called Zman Cheresenu is because Jews were liberated. They were liberated from Egypt. But the truth is, it's much more profound than that. Why is Pesach called Chag HaMatzos, the holiday of matzahs? As if matzah is the essence or the symbol of the celebration of that holiday, that Yom Tov. Why? Why is matzah that? What does matzah really symbolize? And we will see that when we understand Pesach, we will understand an enormous amount of the task of man, and why Pesach is so great, and also many other events. We'll understand even why there was a Mabul by Noach. Why was there a Mabul by Noach? Why were the generations spread out by the Dor HaFloga, the Tower of Babel, when they wanted to war with God? He spread them out. Why? All these ideas are answered when we understand the essence of Pesach. So therefore, let us begin to delve into Pesach and of course find out what its real meaning is. We know, of course, that almost everything in Hashkafa starts with Adam Rishon, right? The first man. Everything seems to work its way back to Adam Rishon. What does Pesach have to do with Adam Rishon? The truth is that Pesach, the essence of Pesach, was the essence of it is an attempt by the Jewish people to restore the Bria, creation, to its original state. It was actually the third attempt by the Jews to restore creation to its original state. What does that mean? We know that Adam before the Chet had a Yetzer Hara, but the Yetzer Hara was external to him. It was in the form of a Nochosh, a snake. And that snake symbolized, of course, the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara. And it was the job of that snake to tempt Adam Rishon to do a sin. Now, what happened was, of course, is that Adam, or rather Chava, and then Adam afterwards, of course, listened to the Nochosh, the argument of the Nochosh. And basically, the argument of Nochosh was that the Ribono Shel Olam is not as all-powerful as he seems. That the reason why he told Adam not to eat from the tree of good and evil is because he himself derived his awesome powers from that. And Chava, of course, bought that argument, and they both therefore ate from that tree. This was the argument of the Nochosh. Now, the Nochosh's job really was to tempt Adam Harishon, to try to get him and Chava to eat from the tree. This was the job of the Nochosh. The job of Adam was to be masik, to comprehend that really God is the source of all creation. That the truth is that besides God, there really is nothing else. Nothing exists like God. And the tree itself is an illusion that is set up, that is created. So Adam should think that there is a power independent of God. And Adam has to realize or figure out that it is God who is the ultimate power of all creation, not any tree. In other words, what Adam has to realize is what's called Yichud Mitziusoi, the absolute or total oneness of God as the supreme being, the source of all creation, therefore the master of all creation. The fact that the Ribono Shel Olam is existence, therefore he truly is. And he's the only one that is, Einay Milvadoi, in very short ideas. This is what Adam really should have realized, but he didn't. Instead, he asserted his own independence, and of course, he ate from the tree. Now, the consequences were awesome. But from our perspective, what that did is it changed the task of man. Until now, the task of man was to remove ignorance, where Adam would be masik certain hasagas. There would be an external tempter, Nachosh, a snake, trying to convince him of the limitations of God. And Adam would have to realize who God is. He would have to introduce into his own mind the full measure of the power of God. That's called Ispashtis Kedusha, to spread holiness or the concept of God totally throughout. And this time it manifested itself in himself. He would have to understand who the Ribono Shel Olam is. When the Nachash, of course, talked Adam into doing the Chet, Adam listened to the Nachash. Now, what that meant is there became a new task in creation, a new idea. What kind of idea was that? What the Rabbi Shalom did is he said this, that because you listened to the Nachash, to the snake, therefore no more will your task be to reject, or rather to reject ignorance, and instead understand who God is. It's not so simple anymore. Since you listen to this Nachash, you now have two tasks. One is to destroy the advice itself. You must destroy the Nachash. You brought his argument, now you must fight the Nachash. You must destroy that entity called the snake. And then, once he is destroyed, then you have to understand who God is. Two tasks. So therefore, the task of destroying the Nachash became known as Kfiyas Hara, to subjugate evil. And the task, of course, of understanding who God is became Hispashtis Kedusha, to proliferate or spread holiness or the concept of God to oneself. Therefore, since Adam listened to the Nachash, his task now became to destroy the Nachash. So what the Rabbi Shem did is something very peculiar. He changed the relationship that Adam had with the Nachash before the Chet. He created a new relationship. Before the Chet, the Nachash was not dependent on Adam for its existence. It was only dependent on God for its existence. In other words, whether Adam did a sin or not had nothing to do with the continued existence of the snake. The Rabbi Shalom maintains all creation, and he maintains the existence, of course, of the snake. What the Rabbi Shalom did is he said, is this. He said that from now on, you and the Nachash will vie for existence. How? Because both of you will derive your existence from one power base. And there's only a certain amount of power. If you do appropriate actions, if Adam does appropriate actions, then what he does is he deprives the Nachash of his yonuka, or his nourishment. And therefore Adam gets that nourishment, or that form that God uses to maintain creation. Adam gets it. It's called a shefa. It's like water coming down to the planet, and there's only a certain amount, and everybody's vying for the certain amount of water coming down. If Adam does the appropriate actions God tells him to, then Adam and man gets the water. If, however, Adam does not do the appropriate actions, then it is the Nachash that gets the water. And of course, the consequences are that if Adam and his descendants get the water, then the snake dies. And if the snake gets the water, of course, man dies. In other words, man and the snake, man and the Satan, have become rivals for existence. They have become competitors. They therefore hate each other, as all competitors do. And that is the logic of why it says V'eva oshes between you and the snake. Why would the snake hate man, and why would man hate the snake after the sin? And the answer is because they've both been locked into the same power source. Now you are no more independent of the snake, and he is independent of you. Since you listen to his advice, you must destroy him. And the way you destroy the Nachash, the snake, or the Yetzer Hara, is by having access to his nutrient source. And therefore you can impoverish him and destroy him by doing appropriate actions, which of course are mitzvahs. If you do averos, of course, then the Nachash survives, he wins, and you die. In a nutshell, the relationship between man and the snake changed. Now we know who the Nachash is. The Nachash is really the Yetzer Hara, or he is called the Sitra Achra. The Sitra Achra, of course, means the other side. The other side meaning the forces of evil. We therefore see that the relationship that man has with the Satan changed after the Chet. Before, there were two independent beings, and the Nachash was supposed to entice Adam. After the Chet, of course, what happened is that God made the Nachash and Adam connected to the same power source, and the power source is Kedusha. It's called holiness because that's what sustains the entire creation. They both were connected to the same power source, and they now vie with each other for the limited amount of resources available. Now, that is the first crucial element to understand in our quest to understand Pesach, that the relationship between man and the Nochash changed after the Chet. The next thing we have to understand is the structure of evil. That's the next thing we have to understand. What is the structure of evil? Well, what the Rabbi Shalom did is he created this world. Now this world has 4 levels or 4 existential states. Each one has a different amount of the manifestation of God in it. In the highest state, the highest world or existential state, that's called Atzilus, God is manifest through all creation. At that level, if you were at that existential state, you would perceive the Rebbeinu Shalom purely as He is. In the sense, the fact that everything, you would perceive the fact that God is contained in everything. The next lower existential level is called Bria. At that level, we have the introduction of entities which see themselves as different from God. And that at that existential level, the beings there perceive God throughout creation in an incredible revelation. But there is enough hester or concealment of who God is, so therefore they have a self which is different from God. The next existential state, you have what's called Yetzirah. And in that state you have spiritual beings that also are very elevated, and there's an enormous amount of manifestation of the presence of God, but of course there's much more concealment. And the lower state of course is this world called Olam Asiyah, where God is almost absolutely concealed from us. Now those 4 states are really indicated in the 4 letters of God's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei. Each letter of course represents one Olam, one existential state. Now, in order to give man the ability to choose, He gave him free will. Because God wants man to earn reward based on his own free will. In other words, man has to be a true cause toward his actions. He has to have been responsible for what he does. Therefore, God gave man free will. But even if a person has free will, that's not sufficient. What he must have is a freedom of choice, in the sense that he has to have alternatives to choose from. I may be able to choose freely, but if there's only one thing to choose, so what? It's like elections in Russia. Everybody can have elections, but there's only one guy on the party line. So obviously it doesn't say much for what the guy can, what his free will is all about. Therefore, what the Rebbeinu Shalom did is he created a complete opposite system to the system of holiness, and that's the system of evil. The system of holiness is called the Sitra de Kedusha, the side of holiness, and that has these 4 existential levels, which of course have various different degrees of the manifestation of the presence of God. On the other side, the Sitra Achra, which means the other side, God also created 4 worlds. Each one is a world unto itself. Each one is a different manifestation of evil. In other words, it gets worse and worse as you go higher and higher. So the greatest amount of evil is in the highest world, the next amount of evil is the next, the lowest amount of evil is the next, and so on, and the least amount of evil is in this world. Now, we see that as compared to the 4 worlds, existential states where God reveals Himself, there are also 4 worlds where God is completely concealed, and the concealment becomes worse as you go higher in the world, the Sitra Achron. Each world is called a klipa or an olam. What is a klipa? A klipa means a shell. And when you refer to the Sitra Achra, you really refer to klippas or shells. They're called shells. Why? For several reasons, but one of the most important is that they are the husks. Klippa means husk or shell. And just like a shell of a fruit, it is meant to be discarded, right? So therefore the klippa or the evil is meant to be discarded also. That's why they're called klippas, because they're meant to be thrown away or discarded. In any case, the 4 worlds of the Sitra Achra, there are 4 worlds or 4 klippas, 4 elamas, 4 worlds. The totality of all the worlds is called a Zoyhamor. Zoya means pollution. What it means is that after the Chet of Adam Rishon, the Nachash was given dominion over this world. Why? Because he is given enormous strength as a result of the sins of man. Therefore, he was able to introduce into creation his influence on this world. And Chazal referred to it as Zoy Hamor, Hitalbo Zoy Hamor, that he was able to introduce into the world his influence, and that's called Zoy Hamor. In other words, he was able to introduce into this world the presence of evil that exists in all the four Olamas of the Sitra Achra. Therefore, this world sort of has four different kinds of evil, and that's the Zoy Hamor, the pollution, the influence that the Satan was able to introduce as a result of the Chet, the sin of Adam Rishon. Now, how are these referred to? What are these four worlds, or what does it mean that there are four states of evil? Okay. Chazal say in the first beginning of Bereshis, it says, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'es ha'oretz. In the beginning, God created what? Heaven and earth. Now, heaven refers to the Sitra de Kedusha, the whole world of holiness, spiritual. V'ha'oretz refers, of course, to the world of the Satan, the world of the Sitra Achra. That's another meaning, of course, besides its plain meaning. The pasuk also has, of course, the hidden meaning. So in the beginning, God created two opposite worlds. One world where God is manifested, and the other world where God is concealed. And then it says, V'ha'oretz hoyes soyu v'voyu, and the earth was soyu v'voyu. Okay? Soyu means tremendous chaos, and voyu means emptiness. And Rashi says that it's really one thing in the sense that if you were at that world at that time, you would be astonished, toyu, at the voyu, at the emptiness of the world. And then it says, V'choshech ha'pnei sahoim, and there was darkness over the face of the abyss, the deep waters. And of course, the Spirit of God hovered over these waters. Now, Chazal say, the Medrash says something very interesting, that these four terms, Toyu, Voyu, Choshech, and Tahoim. Toyu, of course, is astonishment, Voyu is emptiness, Choshech is darkness, and Tahoim is abyss, a huge expanse of ocean. These four terms refer to the four exiles, or the four kingdoms. Who are they? Bavel, Babylon. Toyu refers to Babylon. Voyu, Toyu, which means confusion, refers to Bavel. Voyu, which means emptiness, refers to Poras, Persia. Choshech, which is darkness, refers to Greece. And Tahoim, the huge expanse, refers to Edom or Rome. Now, of course, it's a very strange Chazal. What do the four kingdoms the exiles have to do with the beginning of Bereshis? What does one have to do with the other? Why would the concept of four exiles have to be in the second pasuk of Bereshis already? And the answer is a very profound idea. The truth is that the four exiles are not merely four exiles. The four exiles, each exile is really a different existential state of evil. Remember, there are four worlds of evil? Each exile represented a different form of evil. Let's begin to understand that. What are the four forms, existential states of evil? Remember, they are characterized by the absence of God. Evil means the absence of God, not merely the absence of God. The first state of evil, you know what that is? When there's a confusion between good and evil. When good and evil reign at the same time, there are no boundaries. It's hard to see when something is good or evil. That's the lowest or the best form of evil, because that evil has good with it. Except that good and evil can be in one man. Good and evil can be in one nation. In other words, good and evil reign in the same place at the same time. That's the lowest state of evil, the easiest state of evil to endure. The second state of evil, which is harder, it's harsher, is when good is absent. There's no more good, there is only evil. But the evil that is the absence of good, not an evil per se. In other words, it's not an independent alternative system that vies with good as in its attempt to interpret reality. In other words, there is what's called ignorance or an absence of toiv. That's the second stage of evil. The third stage of evil is when it's no more, it's not only, and which of course is much worse, is not only there's an absence of toiv, therefore there is evil, but there is an alternative reality. In other words, the evil there is an entire Weltanschauung of the world interpreted through evil. You see, it's not just an absence of good, but it is an entire understanding of reality as a place of evil. It's an actual alternative system of understanding which is evil. That's the third level, which of course is much worse, because in that already you think the evil itself says, I'm a real system. I will explain what happens. It's a real alternative toward good. It's a system, not merely an absence of good. And the fourth stage of evil, which is the worst of all, is the third stage spread throughout. It is the complete proliferation, the pervasiveness of the third stage, which is the alternative system of reality in terms of with an evil interpretation, which is completely spread throughout the world. That's the fourth stage. That is the worst, because at least if there was that third stage in one place, okay, you can get away from it. But it's all over the place. There is no escape. That is the worst form of evil possible. Got it? Those are the four states of evil. Each one is a concealment in some way of God. The first, again, is what? Is confusion, because there's a good and evil mixture. The second is ignorance. It's an absence of good. The third is an alternative reality. It's a system where evil actually has an entire rational framework which justifies its existence. And the fourth is the tremendous pervasiveness, the comprehension of that system throughout all creation, or the entire world. That is the understanding of the stages of evil. And if you go back, we will see that the symbolic terms in Bereshis refer to these four stages. Tohu means what? Confusion. Why is Tohu confusion? Because that's what it means. When good and evil reign together, there's a tremendous confusion. What is good and what is evil? And that, of course, corresponds... well, we'll see in a minute. The next term, of course, is vohu. And what is vohu? Vohu means emptiness. There you are. Absent. To be absent. Where good is absent, it's empty. There is no good. Therefore, there's evil. The fourth stage is called the third stage, is chushech, darkness. What do you mean darkness? It is a darkness which is an alternative system to light, or chushech. It's a darkness, and the darkness in Bereshis was not an absence of light. It was a true positive entity which God created. In other words, it was an opposite of light, but not an absence of light. It was a true positive entity in its own right. That is the third existential state of evil, where evil has its own system of understanding things, that it can justify its own existence. And the next one is Tahoim, the abyss, because what does the ocean do? The ocean is dark, but it spreads to 3/4 of the earth. So therefore that's the fourth level of evil. The Torah uses this terminology, these symbolic terminology, to describe the four existential states of evil. Tohu, confusion; voyu, emptiness; chushech, darkness; Tahoim, the oceanic expanse. To describe these ideas: confusion, ignorance, alternative reality, and the comprehensiveness of that reality, that evil reality, throughout all the entire world. Now, What are these things? These are the four worlds of the Zohar, right? Very important to remember. These are the four worlds of the Zohar. These are the four klippas of the Zohar. That's what they are. And they are four. In other words, the totality of evil which the Satan tries to inject into this world are these four existential states, four olamas. And in this world, that's the way they look. Now, if it is a task, okay, now, there is another place which describes these ideas, the four worlds of the Klippa. And that is by Yecheskel. In the Maisim Merkava, the account of the divine chariot, at the beginning of Ezekiel, Yecheskel, we read there that he was standing by a river, and all of a sudden he beheld the heavens open up. And he says that he saw a stormy wind and a dark, huge cloud. Ruach Sa'ora, a stormy wind. Onon Godel, a gigantic cloud. Eish Mislakachas, a flaming fire that would spit out its flames. V'noiga, and a brilliance around it. And then it says further, of course, that he saw divine spiritual beings and so on. But what are these four things? These four things are the world of the Klippas. What he saw on his journey upward, which I had discussed in another tape, the whole journey of prophecy, how you actually journey through the Olamas. But what he saw initially is the four worlds of the Klippa. Ruach Sa'ara, a stormy wind, a great cloud, an Eish Mislakachas, a flaming fire, and of course Noiga, a brilliance. What does that refer to? Well, Ruach Sa'ara is what? Or let's go in the bottom. Noiga refers to the first level or first olam, which is confusion. In other words, there's a light. There's a light, but there is truth and toiv in it, but that can also be darkness. That level of the klippa has good and evil. That's why it's referred to as noiga, as a light, because it has the capacity of being a light. There's good and evil there. It is possible to distinguish in that world good. The next olam is called Eish Mislakachas. That is fire. And that fire represents evil with no good. The good is absent. That's the second olam of the Klippa. Onan Godel refers to cloud, which of course, when there's a cloud, what does it do? It darkens the earth, right? That refers to the chishech, the darkness, which is the alternative system. And Ruach Sa'ara, a stormy wind, what does it do? It carries the clouds all over the earth, right? That refers to the Tahim. Therefore, we see that we now have three ideas about the Olamas, the Klippas itself, or the Zohar, the entire existential states of evil. We can say Tohu is one, confusion. In the Torah, it's represented by confusion. In the Torah, what it means, of course, rather the first state of evil is confusion, good and evil. The symbolism to use to describe in the Torah is called Tohu, which means confusion. In Yecheskel, it's referred to as Nega, because it has the capacity to have good in it also. The second idea, the second existential state of evil is ignorance, or the absence of good. The Torah refers to it as Voyu, which means emptiness. And Yecheskel is referred to as Eish, which means, of course, the fires of evil. The third idea, of course, is the alternative reality system of evil, and that is called Choshech, darkness, and that is the Onan Godel, great cloud, Yecheskel, and then you have the Tahim, the abyss, the expanse of ocean, which refers to the comprehensiveness of that evil system throughout, and Yecheskel, that's Ruach Sa'ara, the great wind that disperses clouds all over the earth. Now, What is the task of a Jew? Or what is the task now? Actually, the task of mankind at that time was, of course, to usurp, to take back all the holiness that the Satan has as a result of the sins of man. Okay, that would be the task of man. So it is the task of man to do what? To actually vie with all these existential states of evil and remain righteous. And in that way, no matter what the Satan threw at him, no matter what existential state he was in, if he would remain righteous, he would take back the Kedusha, the nourishment, the water, the power that the Satan has as a result of sins of man. You see? Therefore, mankind, after Adam, had to remove or destroy the Satan and had to be subjected to the different klippas. That is the task of man, to remove the zoyama. And then, of course, he would be able to hispashtis kedusha, which means, of course, to restore the idea of God to himself. But he would have to war with the Satan and remove these four existential arenas of evil. Now, this is the beginning. This is the stage of man. What do we see so far? We see, therefore, that the task of man is to remove the zoyhamor from creation, to remove all the nutrients or the power source, that flow that goes from God to maintain the existence of the Satan. Man must channel that away from the Satan and take it for himself. Therefore, man must vie, he must exist in the different existential states of evil and remain righteous, and in that way he can remove the power to the Satan and take it for himself. Now, as such, man now has to, of course, endeavor in this direction. What did the world do? Instead of doing righteousness, what happened to the world? It became evil. For 10 generations, man sinned. All mankind had the power to vie with the Satan in this way, to remove that power source. For 10 generations he sinned. He sinned so much that he gave the Satan unbelievable power. Okay? What happened? Along came the Rabbi and said, okay, I will destroy man. And the only one he saved was Noach. What did he destroy man with? A flood. He destroyed him with a flood. That flood symbolized what? It symbolized that mankind had become totally pervaded by evil. That the existential reality that existed in the world was complete evil throughout the entire world. Therefore, man would be destroyed with a symbol, the physical symbol of that state, which was Tahaim. In Bereshis, what is a state that represents complete domination of evil? Tahaim, the abyss. Therefore, man was destroyed with water. And it says, in fact, it says, Niftachu, Arubas HaShemayim. The windows of heaven were opened, right? And the wind, and in fact, it says here that in the 600th year of the life of Noach, in the 17th day of the month, Nifku kol mainois tohim rabo. Loshen, huh? That the fountains of the great abyss, the oceanic expanse, opened up, and the windows of heaven opened up, right? Tohim, it says tohim rabo. What that indicated is that man was destroyed with the very symbolic or physical manifestation when evil dominates completely throughout the earth. Now you understand why the marble was water, because it symbolized that the Satan had complete shlita, complete power and control over all creation, given to him by the sins of man. Therefore, what destroyed him? That symbol itself, the Tahaim, which indicates that level of evil, destroyed man. See, not for nothing did man die by a flood of water, a Tahaim. You see, now you begin to see the connection. Okay. God saves Noach, and by the way, the teva in the midst of this ocean, represents the Shekhinah. Because it's the only thing left. It's the only last surviving Kedusha left that the Satan did not take. And it is with Noach, because he was righteous. And this little teva in the entire planet is the only last repository of nourishment for man. Could you imagine that? That's why man was destroyed, because the Satan had all the Anuka. You know, it wasn't the fact that man sinned so he deserved to be destroyed. It was the fact that the Satan demanded his due, which is, I want all the power that man had. So therefore he got that power. So therefore what happens to man when the Satan takes the power? He dies. That's exactly what happened. And he died with the exact instrument or symbol that represents that power, which of course is the Tohim. So this little teva in the midst of the entire planet, filled with water, represents the last vestige of Kedusha left to mankind. Fortunately, there was enough to save Noach and whatever animals were with him. That's the Pnimiyus of the Maisa of the Mabel. Okay? Fine. Mankind continues for another 10 generations. What does he do? He again sins. But the Rosh now will not destroy him with Tohim, with water. Right? Because God promised that he will not destroy man anymore. So what does God do? He spreads him over the face of the earth. Right? He spread him all over. And that's how the beginning of the diversity of languages occurred. Man tried to war with God by building a tower. And what did the Rosh do? He saw what they were doing and he spread them throughout the earth. He was mefazeh them. Pizur. He spread them all around. Again, the concept of destruction, of which we begin to see. What is the term used in Yecheskel? Ruach Sa'ara, the stormy wind. What does a stormy wind do? It spreads. Winds spread clouds throughout. Right? The essence of the fourth level of existential evil, right, is the fact that it's completely spread out throughout the entire world. Well, that's exactly what God did to man. As a result of the sins of man, he spread man out throughout. In other words, that the power of evil had enough power in it not to destroy man, but to spread him throughout the planet. So the punishment of man was that he was spread throughout the entire planet. No more could he be together. In other words, instead of water, Tohim, we find the concept of spreading, which is what the wind does, by the Dohafloga. We continue. The Rabbi now addresses Avram. Now we know, I had mentioned previously, that why did mankind have to be spread out? And we know the answer to that. Or at least I once said it. Because once God said that, okay, now I will give the ability to war with the Satan over to Avram Avinu, right? Therefore, if all the nations are together, so then it's the nations of the world, it's really mankind, and mankind at that time was only one nation, it's mankind against Avram. Well, if it's Avram against mankind, Avram will never exist. Because that nation will destroy Avram. So what God had to do is spread mankind throughout. He created the concept of many nations, so therefore all of them cannot gang up on Avram anymore. Now they'll fight each other. So Avram and his descendants can survive. In other words, one of the ideas of spreading mankind is that now that the concept of a masakin, the concept of an individual who would take over the task of removing the Zoy HaMor, since it's going to be given to one individual, right? What that meant is that they have to be spread out, because if they remain together as one nation, they will destroy Avram and his descendants. Therefore, what God did is he spread out all the nations, and he created the concept of nations, because that's when it was created. Different languages make different nations. So that they would war amongst themselves and not against Avram. And of course, now we see that God wants to reunite the nations together, right? Because the Mashiach will fight against the entire world. So therefore God introduced the United Nations, which of course unites all the nations together. And of course, what exactly is the United Nations doing all the time? Trying to undermine Israel.